Hey, Joseph, can we just... Yeah, no.
Presenters,
So when people walk in, they don't see the plaque sitting up there. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Just this one here or that one?
No, it's just that one. We can delete that one now. That one now, and that one. Just delete it. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Just need that one. Let's delete it. Oh there, go to Command Z. No, that's the wrong one.
That's the wrong one.
Yeah, you just deleted the good ones. Undo. So delete that one and that one. That's it. Thank you. And would you be able to then come up and just put this talk up? Thank you.
I just thought I'd say hello.
Yeah, we've got to catch up.
I'll have to miss this session.
Just while you're settling in, a reminder that
Friday field trips. There's 5 wonderful field trips available. If you want to try and squeeze in, this is for the field trips on Friday. There's an excellent selection. You can go and ask at the registration desk. Say Kingsley recommended that you ask the desk. They'll probably hate me for that. But there are some spaces left on just some of the buses for some of the tours. So that's the Friday field trips. And just a reminder again, don't forget the AGM, last thing after the last session today at the St Lucia Cafe for the Society for Ecological Restoration. And don't forget this Thursday, the conference dinner. If you haven't got your ticket, this is your last chance, because that's also the awards ceremony. A host of great prizes will be given out. So at this stage we'll move into the second part of the plenaries in this bracket of plenaries for this morning's session. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Maksym Polyakov. Maksym did his PhD at the University of Alabama. He's actually a forester who saw the light and has come across to our green side, so well done, Maksym. He's an environmental economist and works in the Centre for Economics, Policy and Environment at the University of Western Australia. And I'm sure I got that name wrong, but anyway, I've tried my best. Maksym today is going to speak on the whole value system in restoration, so it gives me great pleasure to invite him to the podium. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting conference. Already after 2 first talks, I feel that it's success. The feeling I have is that I'll just pick up where David left, and we didn't collude. Could you confirm that we didn't collude? No collusion. Before talking about economics and restoration and values, I'd like to tell a story which I was told in... Actually, I was doing PhD at Auburn University, which is a big difference, completely different than Alabama. So there was a visitor who tells this story that he was doing his PhD in economics in MIT in the 90s, and his professor told that story, and he was telling it every time at the first lecture. He was flying from the Logan Boston airport, and he noticed that the gentleman next to him wanted to talk. And there are 2 types of people who fly. Some people like to talk to strangers, and other people, like us, like to prepare to presentations and run models before the conference, so maybe just read newspaper. So professor wanted to read newspaper, and he make sure that it's clear that he didn't want to talk. But still, neighbor, he insisted, and he asked, what do you do for a living? What is your business? And he told that, Professor, I'm an environmental economist. And the gentleman next to him, he didn't say a word anymore till the end of the flight, because he thought that probably he was confused. He couldn't understand how economics and environment could be in the same sentence. And professor is Robert Stavins, and he's an environmental economist, and he basically spent his career to apply economics to improve environmental decisions. And I hope that in this audience there is no one who would be confused with economics and ecological restoration and values. Okay, so when we talk about ecological restoration, we think about environmental and ecological and biology, but it is human endeavor, and it depends on, it's driven and it's limited by ecological, economic, and social factors in the same extent. And there was a steady stream of economic concepts and terms and tools from economics to ecological restoration to practitioners and scientists. And just a few examples are listed here would be using cost when ranking projects based on theory of decision and uncertainty, cost-benefit analysis, ecosystem services, interesting term, market-based instrument and design of the auctions, discounting, and non-market valuation. And some of the terms or concepts or tools, they are very well accepted and practiced, and cost is one of them. And I'm sure that most of the practitioners are better with cost than most of the academic economists. But some other are not maybe as much practiced and maybe sometimes misunderstood, and one of them would be non-market valuation. And maybe ecosystem services would be some other. So in this presentation, I'd like to talk a little bit about non-market valuation. How do we value things and why do we need that? And I'll show 3 examples of studies which I participated, or my colleague participated, which is in context of ecological restoration and how this non-market valuation can help. So why do we need valuation at all? Like if you do ranking, there are at least 2 reasons. One is if you rank projects, we need both cost and values. And we can have different units for values, but using same units as costs, which is dollars, would be good. And another one, when there is investment, and government might need to have to be sure that our result of our ecological restoration is at least worth money spent. So we would like to have some measure of the benefit, some value. So about valuation. So suppose you have restored ecosystem, which is on the top, and it has some benefits, it has some values, and it's very useful to use ecosystem services concept to actually go about these values. And there is well-known and accepted classification of ecosystem services, and we could talk about provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting ecosystem services. They provide different values, and they are different services. So provisioning would be food, fiber, culture would be aesthetics and recreation. Another thing which is important when you're talking about valuation of ecosystem services is who gets the benefits. So who are stakeholders, who are beneficiaries of those ecosystem services, and who gets value. So we could have landholder, and landholder would be someone who gets mostly these provisioning ecosystem services, like if you have agriculture, there is grain, wool, meat, and that's something which is captured by landholder. But also there is community, there is closest community. For example, if there is some recreation, that would be captured by immediate close community. And there are some services which are more widely. For example, the value of existence of some species, and that would be something which whole society value. And also we can talk about experts. I'm not sure how relevant. These experts are different only in the sense that they have better understanding and knowledge of the subject. So I'll also use that framework to demonstrate what do we value and why. And we would like to get all of these values, but you don't have to. Sometimes it's enough to have just some of those. And it's important also to know why do we value. And in some instances, it's enough to have some of these values. For example, value to the landholder, if landholders make decision about something. Another thing that about these ecosystem services that some of them there are market for the values, and for some others there is no market. And if there is market, it's easy. There are prices, and we can easily calculate values. And if there is no market, there are no prices, and it's complicated. So environmental economists devised a number of tools to assess these non-market values. So 2 main groups of tools would be revealed preferences methods, where we observe what people do, how do they behave, what choices do they make, how do they pay for something, and then we try to extract what value do they put on things, like ecosystem services. Example would be hedonic pricing method. So suppose there are houses, some houses are close to the trees or park or beautiful view, and another similar house could be not close to trees or park or view, and everything is the same except the park, for example, and people are willing to pay for that other house higher price because of view or park or tree. And we can use results or data from the sales of houses, for example, or sales of parcels of land, and to infer what is the value of those houses or trees or beautiful views. Which are really quick. So second group of methods would be stated preferences method. They actually ask people to tell how do they value things. So hedonic pricing methods or total cost method are not applicable in many cases, and also we don't capture all the values we are interested. So in the case of hedonic pricing method, we just capture the value of this park, for example, to the people who live next to that park, but not to the whole city, for example. So when we ask how people value things, it could be complicated because people tend to not to tell truth. So economists, or maybe they want to please those who ask questions. So economists devise different tricks to try to actually extract true responses. And one of the specific methods is choice modeling. So we basically construct several choice sets, which consist of several attributes and their levels, and there is also cost to respondent. And we ask people to choose one of those, or one of several choice sets. And then we do some statistical modeling, and we figure out what is the value of each of those attributes. Okay. There are many important things about how to make it correct, but this is very brief. And then also, both of these methods could be expensive or costly or take time. So we can sometimes just use values obtained from one of those two or groups of methods and then convert them to other location or sites. So we have this benefit transfer method, which we have case study. We estimated what is the value of these trees, for example, and then we have another policy case, and we just convert and make some adjustment and value. Okay, so this is briefly about how do economists value. Environmental economists can help value ecological restoration. And I'll show 3 examples where I use application and how it helped to cause of ecological restoration. First example is value of urban stream restoration and case studies Bannister Creek living stream in Perth metro area. So this is Perth metropolitan area, and this is study site, and this is exploded. This is this project. This is tributary of Canning River, and tributary of this Swan River. So that's what happened before development. It was kind of maybe pasture and some wetland and creek, and then as city developed, there was this wetland converted to drain, which only function has is drainage, which is like getting rid of water from the suburb, and it's 2000. And local community group called Bannister Creek Catchment Group, they had this idea to convert this stream, this drain to stream, to convert to natural state. So they drafted plan, they got funding from Alcoa and from City of Canning, and they started this project in late 2000. And then they gave this creek or straight drain kind of natural shape, and then put some vegetation and make different slopes. And that's what happened. So in the year 2001, this construction started. So it had different shape, and then the vegetation started to grow, and then in 2010 it's close to kind of natural ecosystem. And then this how does it look like before and after. Same place, we see, it's interesting, it's the same rail. So, and people from the past, so we know that it's good, we feel really good about that, and there was some cost. And people from the Department of Water asked, so what is the value? Is this value of this project or restored ecosystem greater than the value of the cost we spent? And the reason that if you know that it's higher cost, higher values, then we could convince other people to do similar things. So we used hedonic pricing method. We used house prices. Luckily, there was suburb developed in this area, so we got prices from 92 to 2015, and there were many sales. And we assumed that so this is a project, and we assume that impact of this 200 meters approximately. So people within 200 meters would capture these benefits. And if they capture this, like this new kind of space, green space, park, native place, and if they like, they're willing to pay, and they would pay higher prices for houses. Okay, so we did analysis we got data from 6 suburbs, and we look what is the difference of trends of prices in those 6 suburbs relatively to prices of houses in this area. And so in this case, what value can we capture? We capture these cultural aesthetic recreation values and supporting services, which is like support for biodiversity of this site, and just to local community, to people who live immediately close to it. We don't capture these values because there is more value, but we're only able to measure this with this method. So we did analysis, and we did several different methods, and we found that immediately after construction, the value of houses went down because it was a nuisance and it was not as it became even worse first few years, and then it went up and grew to about 4%, more than 4% relatively what it would have been without this project. So we calculated benefit, and we found that the benefit is about $4.8 million in 2010, and we knew what is the cost. We compounded, we did cost-benefit ratio, it's 2.5, which means that the benefit is 2.5 times higher than the cost, and we did make sure that the results are robust. We did sensitive analysis under different scenarios and different assumptions, and still it's robust. So it's really there is benefit greater than cost, even if you take into account only part of the benefits. And this basically a really good case for the similar community groups to make a case to develop similar project and to get funding from the government or from the industry. So it helps proponents of similar projects. Okay, second project is in rural settings. So it's private benefit of native vegetation in fragmented agricultural landscapes. The purpose is slightly different. So we try to estimate value to the landholders. What is the value of native vegetation to landholders with thinking about ecological restoration? So as David mentioned, there is ecological restoration going on in fragmented landscapes like Victoria, New South Wales, and so if there is a vegetation, suppose there is 1 hectare of bush, and definitely there is public benefit, so benefit to society. It's on our vertical axis. So we get benefit, but whether there is benefit to the landholder, it's a question. It depends. So in some cases, the landholder values this cleared land or agricultural land higher than bush, and then there will be a negative effect. In some cases, it's not as bad. In some cases, actually, landholders would prefer to have bush. In this case, there is win-win situation. There is benefit for both society and landholder, and we would like to find these cases. Okay, so the question whether do landholders actually value bush compared to agricultural land, and we can think of agricultural property or rural property as having cleared land and bush, and both of them produce some ecosystem services. So red would be ecosystem services provided by the cleared land, like agricultural land, and there is provisioning. Okay, they grow wheat or whatever they grow. There is supporting, regulating cultural, and green arrows would be ecosystem services by the native vegetation. And there is no provisioning because we assume that it's not timber production. So and then landholder interested in all the ecosystem services, and society only in cultural, recreational, aesthetic ecosystem services. And so we want to know what is the trade-off between those two. So we did some other things, that there are different types of landholders. Some would be like farmers. They are more interested in the provisioning services, and lifestyle would be more interested in cultural. So you want to know who and when and why and what circumstances value this native vegetation on the property. So we had collected the data about sales of rural properties in North-Central CMA of Victoria. We had 7,000 observations, properties greater than 1 hectare, and we did some analysis, and we got these curves. So it shows how much property value greater or less, higher or lower than property without any native vegetation, if it has some native vegetation. So this is, on the x-axis we have proportion of remnant native vegetation, on y-axis whether it increases or decreases property value, and it depends on the area or size of the property. So presumably small properties like 1 hectare, they would be lifestylers, they would be interested in the native vegetation, and then they would benefit. So if you have half of small property in native vegetation, it has higher value than property without any. For big farms, it's different. Like it increases until 15 to 20% of native vegetation on the property is the value, which means that the owner values that native vegetation on the property. And if it go beyond that, it decreases value of property. So it's loss. And why do small landholders like lifestyles value it? Clear, they like nature. Farmers also like nature, but also they might value livestock or shelter, for example, what David just mentioned, or other services which provided by this native vegetation on the property. But if it's too much, actually main goal is production of wheat or sheep, so that it will reduce value. Okay, and then we can see what is the optimal proportion of native vegetation on the property, and this map shows green would be properties. There is some potential to increase area of native vegetation in the properties to a certain extent, and that increase would improve welfare of the landholders. So landholders would benefit. They would like to do that. Obviously, government have to help. So this is could be used for targeting ecological restoration. So the lessons from this study are that native vegetation is valued by the landholders, but to a certain extent, and the more we have, the lower value, and then it could be also negative. There is scope to enhance welfare of landholder in these landscapes by increasing area of native vegetation by ecological restoration. And this information could be used to target sites where you think that this ecological restoration would be at lower cost because landholders would like that and will do it for free. So this is second study. Third study is completely different. It's in marine context. And this is done by my colleagues Abi Roger and Michael Borton from Center for Naval Economic and Policy at University of Western Australia. So this is reef restoration. So this is, there is a project of restoring this reef in Gulf of St. Vincent in South Australia. There was 4 hectares restored, and there is being done. 16 other hectares will be being done, and Nature Conservancy got funding from the government, but government actually want to make sure that this is a viable project and that there is benefit the greater than cost if they allocate the money for that. So my colleague did this benefit cost analysis. So the idea is that the timeline of this reef construction would be there is first year there is establishment, oyster seeding, reef start functioning to attract fish. Then after 3 years, oyster becomes actually mature. After 7 years, its ecosystem functions, and after 30 years, a completely natural reef. So they took some costs and some benefits, or they took establishment cost and some benefits. And benefits would be willingness to pay for additional reef. So this is like existence value. And another benefit would be benefit to the recreational fishermen. Okay, in this case, they use completely different methods. They use benefit transfer. They found studies which did evaluate the benefits of these two things. Tein McDonald in 2015 studied willingness to pay for reef, and 2 other studies looked at the benefit for anglers, and they got cost. And what do we value here? We value, so angler benefit or fisherman benefit would be these, recreational, and it goes to local community, and this is willingness to pay for the existence of this reef. And this is for whole society. Okay, and we ignore other. There could be other things. There could be some, like it attracts fish, or maybe commercial fisheries would have some benefits, but we just look at these two. And then they did cost-benefit analysis. So the cost, second line, and then environmental benefit, recreational fishing benefit, and net present value. So they do discounting because this is assumed to be happening every year. This is just first year establishment. And net present value is the value, present value of the all benefit minus cost. It's positive, and benefit cost ratio is positive. So basically, conclusion is this is viable project and it's worth spending money on the project. So, and conclusion from this talk is that environmental economists developed a range of methods which helps to assess value of ecological restoration and benefit of ecological restoration. Ex post evaluation, like I showed in the first study, helped to justify ecological restoration project and help to promote ideas and secure future funding from government or from industry. Information about private benefit of ecological restoration helps to target ecological restoration on private lands to achieve ecological restoration at lower cost. And rigorous assessment of benefits and cost of programs would be in future required if we want these projects to be financed by the government. Thank you very much. And there is some additional literature if you want to look. So there is a paper which talks about broader range of application of economic and ecological restoration. And there are two other papers which describe those specific case studies which I presented. And the case study which is about reef is not published yet because it's work in progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maksym. Of course, the intersection with David's talk, the farmer value system I found quite interesting because farmers value their property in terms of one value, which is the production, but then things such as their emotional health seems to be parts that should be factored in. What's your thoughts on that?
We could clearly see that farmers do value native vegetation as well as production. So there are many benefits from the farm, and production is only one part of that. But to what extent, this is the question, and we try to answer using this method. Just one more.
One more question?
Yeah.
Can you speak really loudly?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. I guess I was just thinking, I guess given because economics is quite anthropocentric, but one of the issues we face is that when you measure like an ecosystem value, something by anthropocentric means, like the perceived value of something, you end up feeding some of those difficult things like charismatic megafauna or the prettiest flower winds, and often, or there might be an unstudied or an unknown value associated with an ugly plant or an unattractive bird or something. Is there any work done on measuring the economic value or something to that extent?
So I could admit that is a problem, but economists try to go around this and try to understand that this is a problem and try to make adjustment for those things which you mean. And then existence of ecosystem, regardless of what kind of species are there, there is another value which actually exists.
Okay, we don't
have time for any more questions, but Maksym and all the other keynotes will be at lunch, so please buttonhole them. Thank you very much, Maksym. Our next speaker is well known to, I think, nearly everyone in the audience. And if you don't know who it is, then you're about to. Tein McDonald is just such an anchor in ecological restoration from the practitioner to the academic front. Tein, of course, is well known to many of you if you've published in ecological management and restoration as the nail-biting controlling editor of the journal. So be nice to her, buy her cups of coffee, get your paper in. But Tein also has been one of the great stalwarts, not only along with Jen Ford in the organising committee for this conference, but also as a major backstop for the Society for Ecological Restoration Australasia. And of course is most well known for her absolutely exemplary work and hard work in creating the first and second edition of the national standards for the practice of ecological restoration, and is one of the key authors, of course, on the international standards, now also in their second edition. Anyway, I won't steal the thunder from Tein, and we look forward to hearing from you on reference communities. Thank you, Tein.
Oh, excellent. Thanks, Kingsley. And that's enough about me. What about you? Can I just get a bit of a show of hands of how many people are working in the field of ecological restoration on ground in water? Wow, what an excellent swathe of hands just went up. And agencies, policy areas and management? That's good. That's great. What about research side? Wow, what a nice smattering of hands. And who have I missed? Yell it out from the bleachers. Nobody. Wow, that's nice. We can summarise ecological restoration participation into 3 groups. So, yes, I'm here today to talk about how our project, the National Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration in Australia, focuses on reference ecosystems as native ecosystems. And you would think, of course it does, you know, but some question that. So my talk is in that context. The standards were developed by the SERA Standards Reference Group in collaboration with 12 other NGOs, Australian NGOs. I won't list them, but they're listed in the cover of the standards. Now, the core premise is that ecological restoration is assisting the recovery of native ecosystems. Now, that doesn't mean that non-native species are not involved in ecological restoration. Of course they are. They're often appreciated as facilitators of recovery, but they're not the end in itself. And a reference ecosystem is a model for what we're aiming for. However, still, people question whether native ecosystems are necessarily what we should be using as models if even intact ecosystems are being affected by human impacts. Does it mean they're untenable and therefore irrelevant? Well, I hope that this talk will help clarify that no, that's not the case. Also, some people wonder, does this mean that restoration excludes people? No, it's simply about what is an ecological restoration project? How do we ensure that we have appropriate standards of practice? Now, to quote Don Falk, who was a prior former director of the Society for Ecological Restoration, some ecological changes already appear catastrophic and potentially irreversible. This is a slide borrowed from him. He presented to the SERA Europe conference only a couple of weeks ago, and delivered the message that really ecological restoration is faced with an enormous challenge. Humans are faced with an enormous challenge that ecosystems are being faced with an enormous existential threat. He calls the challenge, he says, reversing climate change is mission critical, but so is protecting and restoring biodiversity. And this puts it into context for us. It's not a matter of either or. Protecting and restoring biodiverse native ecosystems is a major reason for reversing climate change, and it's also a major mechanism for reversing climate change. It's not the only reason, and it's not the only mechanism. Addressing causes. So ecological restoration is, and the standards reiterate this, we need to address the causes before we can assume that we can have any potential for success. Complementary activities that improve the ways we use land, water and air are highly relevant to ecological restoration, even if they don't directly restore biodiversity. They may be part of an ecological restoration project if you're looking at the scale that includes all those efforts as well. But what we need to remember is that ecological restoration and complementary activities are joined at the hip. They're two sides of the one coin. We cannot do without each other if our goal is the reinstatement of functional native ecological systems. So the Society for Ecological Restoration parent group, as well as Society for Ecological Restoration Australasia, emphasise in their standards documents relationships between ecological restoration and other activities. So these are essential for reducing damage and improving the functionality of ecosystems. Now, the term we use is we seek to encourage restorative thinking and restorative actions. So restorative in this case is used as an adjective, even though it may not be strictly an ecological restoration project. All land and water management can be framed and directed towards a restorative approach that has outcomes that benefit native ecosystems. So you can imagine, well, many of you are already involved in all these restorative activities as either part of your restoration project or as complementary activities. So basically we're avoiding damage at the consumer and producer end of the broader landscape. We're better managing land and water to avoid inadvertent damage. We are avoiding introducing invasives if they are going to be causing ecosystem dysfunction. Some invasives may not cause ecosystem dysfunction. Some may be actually beneficial. Some may be temporary surrogates for missing native species or native functions. Obviously, this is the big one. The clearing of ecosystems. We need to avoid clearing, and particularly where native ecosystems or extant ecosystems provide connectivity. We have to cease the process of fragmentation, reduce and remediate contamination. All these things are complementary, if not part of a restoration project. We need to work with communities to increase ecological literacy and community engagement in the ultimate care of ecosystems. And so what we're needing to do is transform our cultures and economics to more sustainable, restorative cultures and businesses to replace those that are still part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And it's going to be a slow transformation, but I have optimism, we have to, that this is possible. So SERA, and this goes back to the topic of this talk, the Society for Ecological Restoration in Australasia needs to seek to involve all contributions relevant to the restoration of ecosystems or the recovery of ecosystems in things such as this conference or conferences and other activities that SERA organises. Now you'll see that there's a variety of topics covered in this conference, and this is very healthy. We've got case studies on restoration, including full recovery cases, partial recovery cases that are integrated into utilised landscapes, rehabilitation where it's complementary. We've got the full restoration continuum, or restorative, let me put it that way, continuum, where you're including restoration and rehabilitation and improved utilisation in an integrated package. We have lots and lots of talks about monitoring tools, research on social policy and standards. We've got presentations on social outreach, better planning, improved on-ground tools, linking science and practice, lots of research on ecology and networking. So it's a very healthy diversity and we want to keep it that way. We possibly could encourage in the future more restorative projects that influence the reduction of causal factors, but in doing so, we would like to make a clear connection between those projects and the outcome of improving the condition of native ecosystems. So the standards, the international standards includes this diagram, which is also conceptually in the national standards. What we have here is a diagram showing that there's a continuum. At one end we've got sustainable utilisation, in the centre rehabilitation, and at the right-hand end ecological restoration. This is not that one is a lesser activity than another. As you can see from the little subheading underneath the main heading, these describe the appropriate intervention to best meet the need between what is on the left-hand side social needs. The social needs predominate at that end, and at the right-hand side ecological needs predominate. So we're talking about horses for courses. What is the most appropriate activity at which part of the spectrum? So at the sustainable utilisation end, you'll be looking at preventing degradation. It might be to do with renewable energy. It might be to do with reducing plastic wastes in the oceans. It might be to do with economic models. In the middle, we're talking about how we manage land and water so that we achieve ecosystem services and economic benefits. And at the ecological restoration end, and that's not necessarily isolated at one end of the landscape, it's infused throughout, we have native ecosystems re-establishing. So at the same time as encouraging this broad-scale restorative continuum, SER reaffirms the industry standard that anything calling itself an ecological restoration project needs to be focusing on native ecosystems and using a reference ecosystem that is based on a native ecosystem. Now, that brings us back to whether these things are tenable in this day and age, this age of climate change. Now, I just want to run this past you. I think a lot of people think that ecological restoration and using a reference ecosystem that's native means that we're always aiming for full recovery. That's not the case. The practice of ecological restoration is to strive for similarity to the reference ecosystem or reference model that you have gone to a lot of trouble to design, insofar as possible. So the fact that you may not be able to achieve that for some practical reason or reason of social desirability doesn't mean that your project is no longer called ecological restoration. It can be. So we ask ourselves, are the current site conditions still broadly suitable for what would be there had the degradation not occurred? If that is the case, then you use the model of the ecosystem that would be there had the degradation not occurred. So if that isn't possible because of some sort of ambient change or some sort of physical change, can you amend those physical conditions? If yes, amend those conditions and use that ecosystem as your model. If you can't, can the conditions suit an alternative native ecosystem or a state of that ecosystem that is more feasible and desirable? And this is a very important enablement, I guess, for ecological restoration, because we can't always aim for the gold standard. So it's necessary and desirable to achieve an outcome which is about healthy native ecosystems, not necessarily at all about prior ecosystems, even though we would like that to be the case. So in that case, you'd use an alternative. And if that is not possible, that is when you use the site or design a project to achieve a more restorative management of that site or that ecosystem. Just to illustrate a couple of examples, many of us went to a pre-conference field trip to the Big Scrub in northern New South Wales. Now, the reference ecosystem for most of the sites there is the prior ecosystem, and here's an example at Victoria Park in Alstonville, where inside the square is the remnant, and the triangular bits on the top and right-hand side of that remnant have been their replantings, but they're replantings that harness natural resilience that's some dispersal by birds and bats of species coming from the remnant. So it's totally appropriate to use the prior ecosystem or the existing ecosystem in that case. That does not mean, though, that we're looking to the past. We do need to maintain an attitude of openness with regard potential for that ecosystem in its natural state to be reorganising in relation to such pressures as climate change. Where the conditions are broadly suitable but full recovery is not necessarily socially appropriate, you may achieve partial recovery, and that is still ecological restoration. And this is an example from the Riverina, the travelling stock routes. So we've got 13,000 hectares of travelling stock routes that are under restoration and rehabilitation management in the Murray local area, and the condition of those sites has improved from approximately on a 5-star scale from about condition 2 to condition 3 or 4, which is a magnificent achievement, and we should be proud of that. Full recovery is not necessarily always the best outcome. We remember here we're looking at graze landscapes, and we want to keep that function. We want to keep that social outcome. So this is ecological restoration, but it's part also of a social continuum. Here we have an interesting case where the conditions weren't suitable. This is very old, in some cases 80 to 100-year-old degradation, clay pans from serious erosion in Western New South Wales and elsewhere, where the physical conditions needed to be amended for any recovery to occur. But the prior ecosystem was still the reference used here. And it's still partial recovery because this is on private land that is grazed, and what is paid for the restoration here is the utilisation of the sites by pastoralists. So your target ecosystem, that is what you're aiming for, isn't exactly the reference ecosystem because they're keeping trees out of the system in order to maintain the herbaceous layer, but we're still maintaining a reference ecosystem of the Kenneprob grassland of that local area. Now here's a case where you've got conditions that cannot be reversed to suit the former ecosystem. So this is a case in Cairns in Queensland where pastoral management has exposed acid sulphate soils, which then became active and created a great deal of acid drainage. The treatment involved flooding those soils permanently with seawater to the point where they did not flood the grazing sites as well. So this is a socially modified project, and it shifted it from a freshwater wetland to a saline wetland. Now these are equally, if not more, threatened ecological communities. So this is still considered ecological restoration. And finally, in these case studies, ecological restoration has been carried out on sites to test potential for switching whole ecosystems to alternative ecosystems in cases where we expect sea level rise. So that you can see from this that ecological restoration really actually is highly inclusive, that the standards are not really saying, it's got to be what it was before and it's got to be totally like it was before, or it's not ecological restoration. However, we are aiming to infuse the whole process with a degree of discipline so that we have a guide, a model of prior or existing native ecosystems. We're not making them up. We're not designing ecosystems. We may have to somewhere. We may have to in a great many places. But if we don't keep our native ecosystems going, we stand to lose a great deal of natural heritage. So to lose the distinction between ecological restoration and other complementary activities would actually disempower both, because you don't want ecological restoration everywhere. Things on the left-hand side of the social ecological continuum, the restorative continuum, need to be more directed towards social outcomes to meet social needs. And similarly, those at the more ecocentric end of that continuum need to be more directed towards ecological outcomes. So we're encouraging participants in all these fields to think in terms of benefits for native ecosystems, even if there isn't a direct outcome. And we see this as potentially a unifying force in our restoration community, so that membership of SERA can include more than merely ecological restoration practitioners, but also managers who undertake rehabilitation and other complementary works that are fundamental to resolving problems that allow ecological restoration to take place. So there are countless projects occurring around the world, and there are many initiatives, I won't read these out, to encourage restoration and complementary projects. Now, often they say in these documents restoration. Sometimes they say ecological restoration, but a lot of these global initiatives use the term restoration generically to include both ecological restoration and complementary work. And we must keep this broad view. Now, a few weeks ago I was stunned to see on the news photographs of very, very large meetings in Beijing, I think it was, where there were 40 African heads of state all in the one room. It's been a series of years of meetings between China and Africa. This is just an example of the new world we are now being faced with. There are many countries in the world where there is a desire to develop. The global population will increase by 25% in the next 20 years. Urban migration will continue, leaving rural areas with potential opportunities for restoration and rehabilitation. There will be a massive demand for infrastructure support. Now, I'm very, very interested to see the directions China is moving in. In particular, the Chinese President Xi Jinping is committed to and very impressed with the concepts of ecological civilization, which, if you look it up on Wikipedia, includes a balance between social outcomes and ecological outcomes. So this is the inspiring direction, thank goodness, some of our international powers are directed towards. The slide I showed you before about the water ponding in the agricultural areas has actually engaged with African